Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for November 10th through 16th. This week I read 4 books, I watched 3 movies, I watched 1 show, I watched 1 concert, and I listened to 1 book. As is a popular trend in these videos these days, this is not where I live. This isn't even the country in which I live. I'm currently in Seattle. It is very rainy, as you would expect from Seattle, so the lighting is poor. Sorry about that. But there is a very good view from the top of this building, so I'm going to show you that clip because it's absolutely gorgeous, and sometimes it doesn't rain in Seattle, and I just figure everyone should have some photographic evidence of that. The first book I finished this week was The Bulldog The Helix. This is a non-fiction book about the first case in Canada that went cold and then eventually used DNA evidence to convict the person who killed somebody 20 years previous. This actually happened in a very small town called Port Alberni, which is on the island on which I live, so that was interesting. It also brought up a lot of crimes from the island that I didn't know had happened many years ago, and that was vaguely terrifying. Although it was interesting to go through the history of this science and how it has been used in Canadian courts. I think I've just gotten used to narrative nonfiction, which is my favorite type of nonfiction, and this wasn't that. And that's not its fault. Not every nonfiction has to be written as a narrative, but I think it would have definitely helped because this was very disjointed. It not only focused on this cold case from 1977, it focused on another case that came up a few years later that was very similar in the same area, and because it was going back and forth and kind of going all over the timeline, if you will, it was not super hard to follow, but just very disjointed and didn't flow very well. That being said though, if you are interested in the history of forensic science, it's definitely a book to pick up. The next book I read was The Tea Dragon Festival. This is by Katie O'Neill, who is an artist that I absolutely adore, and I'm sure that if you've been on BookTube before, you've seen something that she's done, especially if you've been on my channel, because I've read 4 of her things now in the last couple of months. This is a prequel companion to the Tea Dragon Society, which just means it takes place before the Tea Dragon Society, so there's an older couple in the Tea Dragon Society, and it takes place when they are younger. This one is all about this little girl who feels like she's not contributing enough to her society, and she wants to become a chef to be able to do that, and it's her coming to terms with realizing that what she does for society, just because it comes easy to her doesn't mean it's not valuable. Next, for Indigathon and Too Old for This Shit book club, I read Kinship. This is a very confusing thing because I thought I was reading a book called The Way of Thorns and Thunder and that Kinship was the name of the series, and it's actually the other way around. The weird thing that happened with this is it is 3 books that were written and then eventually there was a bind-up of them. So I read the first third of this story if we're talking about reading the entire bind-up, or I read the first book, depending on what you're thinking of. The author is Indigenous, and that definitely comes out in the world building of this novel. Although I ended up really enjoying it, and I am getting the second book out of the library because I want to see what happens with these characters, there are a lot of characters and keeping track of them is a little bit of a challenge. It's the type of high fantasy writing that I don't usually jive with because it would be very descriptive but not in a way that was moving the plot along. So there'd be these whole long passages that I would read and then realize I wasn't actually reading them. My mind had gone somewhere else, which made reading the book take a lot longer than it should have. Because I would constantly be going back and being like, okay, what did I miss? Did I miss anything of importance? Did a fight start and I didn't notice? Sometimes yes. Not only am I right next to a train station and a bus station, ambulances go by quite a bit here, so this will be fun to edit. The final book I have to talk to you about in this section is This Is How You Lose the Time War. I originally saw this book over on Cece's channel and figured I would give it a shot. This one is a very strange time travel novel that is also mostly a romance between Red and Blue. These are the only names we're given for these characters. They work for rival agencies. Rude. They work for rival agencies that are basically going back through time to change things so that their agency in the future can be the prevailing agency. It's the easiest way to explain it. What quickly ends up happening though is they start writing letters back and forth to each other that they shouldn't be writing because they're not supposed to contact each other. And through these letters they fall in love, and that whole part of the story was beautiful. It was beautifully written. What I didn't particularly care for was the first about half of it. There was a lot of explaining how they were putting these secret messages in these time frames that they knew each other would be in, and a lot of it wasn't explained in a satisfactory way. It was explained in very poetic terms and beautiful words on the page, but it got to the point where it's like, oh, okay, now this person is hiding a message in this way that you could never actually do in the real world, and I don't really care about that. I want to read the letters back and forth. That being said, I did get hooked into figuring out what was going to happen and whether or not they were going to be found out and whether or not they'd ever actually get together. So it did hook me in the end, but it just took me a little while to fully immerse myself in the language of the text. On the movies I watched this week, the first one being Terminator Dark Fate. Yes, that means that in like a week and a half's time, I watched all 6 Terminator movies. This is the one that's currently in theaters, and I need to note that at no point did anyone steal a motorcycle, which is so weird after watching the last 5 films, and it seemed to be a rule where somebody had to steal a motorcycle. What I really loved about this film is Linda Hamilton was back, and I would like to be her when I grow up. Because Terminator is also a time travel novel, this one definitely plays with timelines, and this is more of a what would have happened if, insert the plot point that makes this interesting here. I thought this film was definitely badass, and this is kind of what I needed out of the 3rd film, which was super sexist. Then this one was not that. This one was empowering and wonderful, and I very much enjoyed myself. We also happened to revisit Wayne's World, which I hadn't watched since I was a teenager, and I definitely forgot a lot of what happened in that movie, but it's still pretty great. Also, because it's Wayne's World, I don't think I need to explain it, so if you've never seen it, just go into it not knowing what it is, because you will laugh. Then for something completely random, I watched The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which was weird. I didn't know what it was going into it, but the person I was watching it with had seen it before and was like, oh, we're watching this. I'm like, okay, fair. And it was a series of, I think, 5, possibly 6 shorter tales about cowboys. The major theme running through this being pretty much in every single story, the protagonist or somebody else major to the plot dies. This had a lot of actors in it that I recognized, so there was that. It was also kind of a parody of this kind of Western storytelling. Unfortunately, I didn't catch about half the dialogue, so I probably should have watched it with closed captions just because I probably would have understood what was going on a little bit better. And this wasn't a terrible viewing experience. It was actually cinematically beautiful, so there's that. It was just a very strange movie. Which leads me into the TV show I watched, because someone else picked that, and I picked to revisit the first 4 episodes of Queer Eye from the very first season, because I just love those humans, and it's just a comfort watch, really. I just wanted to curl up on the couch, be comfortable, and watch something adorable, which is exactly what that was. Now, you probably know that I don't usually talk about music because I don't tend to listen to a lot of it, and I don't tend to really go to that many concerts, but the reason I'm in Seattle is I'm going to GeekCon. I'm actually filming this before I go to the 2nd day of the con, so I've got to get this wrapped up before I go. But yesterday, the Doubleclicks had a concert at GeekCon, and the Doubleclicks are a sibling duo that are the reason I knew about GeekCon in the first place, because I was subscribed to their newsletter, so I would get information about when they were going to concerts and that type of thing. And I believe it was back in 2014 when they sent out a message being like, we're gonna be at GeekCon. And I'm like, what's that? That sounds amazing. And now I've gone every year since. I ended up having a front row seat to the concert, and the funny thing about that is there was one point where Laser just kind of looked at me from the stage, and then after that song ended went, it's really weird that you're sitting right there because we're subscribed to like 3 people on YouTube and you're one of them. So it was a fun moment of, oh, I admire you, you admire me, we follow each other on YouTube. That's cool. I felt like the coolest person. Basically, I just need to talk about that concert to tell you that story, and also I'm going to link the Doubleclicks because I actually really, really enjoy their music. It is very funny, it is very nerdy, and enjoy. And finally, the book I listened to this week was The Number 57 Bus. This is a nonfiction book about an incident that happened in California where this person fell asleep on a bus and this other teenager set their skirt on fire, and it was not a good time, basically. What I really liked about this is it followed the 2 different storylines, if you will, of these 2 different teenagers. One was Sasha. This is the person who was set on fire. Sasha is agender, and this had a lot to do with them coming out and knowing that and expressing their gender identity through how they dress. So they were wearing a skirt, but they tend to wear more masculine clothing up top. And essentially because they tend to stick out, it was thought that this was a hate crime towards Sasha for being what looks like a dude in a skirt. not a dude in a skirt, a gendered child in a skirt. Anyway, it then also gave us the background knowledge on Richard, which is the person that had the lighter and lit the skirt on fire. Although Richard and Sasha are about the same age, they go to different schools in the area. Richard comes from a lower class background, is African American, is a single parent household, and has been in trouble with the law before, but in a situation where it wasn't necessarily his fault. It is a fairly short audiobook, so I don't want to go into too many of the details because I would just rather that you listen to it or read it for yourself, because it was a very interesting story about this event and what happened after the event and also what led up to this event. And I very much enjoyed how it showed both sides of the story, because it would be very, very easy to just paint this person as pure evil, which is a lot of what happened online at the time. That's it for this week. If you've read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!